So in this sub-lesson, we're going to be configuring CFN-NAG to run as a part of CodePipeline. So we're going to run through essentially the same steps that we went through in the previous sub-lesson where we ran CFN-NAG from the command line. But now we're going to incorporate that into CodePipeline via code build. So code build is a fully managed build service that allows us to run. It runs in a container, allows us to run whatever we might run from a command. And so in this case, we're running CFN-NAG from the command line, but through the code build service. So we can incorporate code build as an action within a stage. Do is make it fail. So we're going to run that EBS volume where encryption is turned off. Then we're going to make a modification to that, use the CloudFormation template in which the EBS volume encryption is turned on, and then run through that pipeline again, see that it's successful. And of course, that's just one example. You can have 45 different built-in rules that you can incorporate with CFN-NAG, or of course you can write your own rules with it as well. So let's go through the files that we're going to be using. So there are 4 files in this example. One is a build spec file. The next is a CloudFormation template. The third is the encrypted CloudFormation template, or the CloudFormation template that encrypts an EBS volume. And the last one is the CloudFormation template that has an unencrypted EBS volume. Let's talk about the build spec for just a moment. So build spec YAML file is a specification that you define, but it defines the different phases that you can apply to that within each of those phases. Let's take a look at the build spec file. You can see it's these build spec files can get pretty large, but this is a really basic one. So we identify what the version is. The latest version is 0.2. So we have these different phases. These are predefined as a part of the build specification, but then we can define which phases we want certain things to run. So there might be 10 different phases. I don't know the exact number, but let's say 10 different phases that you could incorporate, say prior to the build, after the build, when files are initially during 2 different phases, we want certain things to run. So during the and we're installing, this is what we did before on the command line. We're installing gem volume encryption turned off. So it runs that. Of course, this is going to return a failure. It tells us what time that we ran. This way we can look at the logs and see what time these things are running. And so the build spec, you can, while it's called build spec YAML, that's sort of the default name that you can use for code build for the files that you want to run. If you have a different name, you can specify that in the code build configuration. So we'll go back to AWS Cloud 9. We'll go to our directory. This is our working directory. And then we're going to create a new file. We'll open up that file, and we're going to copy all the contents. We'll copy all the contents from the sub-lesson here. Let's walk through this CloudFormation template. This is pretty familiar. You've seen this already. You have an email address, a repository branch, the code commit S3 bucket. We saw this in the previous lesson. topic, the code commit repo. So let's look at what's different about this particular example. So here we're defining a logical name, code build role, and it's of type AWS IAM build project. So it gives the permissions to the code build like that before in the previous lesson. But here we have the code build. Imagine we're building depends on that role, so it has to have the IAM role because we then use that role in the service role property for code build. So we're going to use the AWS stack name pseudo parameter. And so we have the service role, and we give it the name of the role and the ARN. The ARN is just a unique name, the Amazon or AWS resource name. And then we have artifacts. We don't need any artifacts for what we're running here. The environment that we're running this on, this is a container. And so we have a Linux container. We're just using a small one. This is a very quick set of actions it's going through. Since Ruby image, and then we're indicating the location of these files are in code commit. And then we have some tags, and we have a timeout and so forth associated with it. So here's where we define the pipeline. So we have AWS CodePipeline pipeline. This looks similar to what we went through before, so let's talk about some of the differences here. So one, it depends on, it has to have that code build project that has to have been created prior to provisioning this. Sometimes you need to do this while it's a declarative language so that it determines code build project has already been created. And so we put depends on, so that just makes a reference to that logical name. And then we have the code pipeline role that it's using, and then we define the stage for code commit. And then here's where it gets a little bit different. Here we have the build stage, and then we have an action, and the action's called CFN nag. So CFN nag, and so we're able to run build actions, we're able to run test actions in code build. And so with test actions, by the way, it means you don't have to have any kind of output artifacts that are generated out of this. And so our provider we're defining as code build, that's of AWS owner, and the category is test. And so there are no output artifacts as you see here. To the code build website, which is the logical name that we gave it when we were defining our code build resource stage. And then we go on to run through a build. So we're running through a simple build that's not running CFN nag. And then we have a deploy, which is just an approval. So very similar to the one we went through in lesson 1, but the big difference is we're able to run CFN nag via code build in this template. So let's go back to the instructions, and we're going to be creating the stack. We're going to be using the CloudFormation CLI to create the stack. And so let's look at this. This is the stack name. We're going to need to make a modification to this, but all this is saying is the location of the file. And so what I'm mentioning here is it's actually local to me. It's a file, and it's in the home EC2 user environment CCOA lesson 2. So if I go back to Cloud9 and I type print working directory, I can see it's home EC2 user. And then that's the location of that file. And then I pass in the parameters of email address and the capabilities. And so I can take this. I don't really need the email address for this example. And I can see that it creates my stack. And so I'll go to CloudFormation, my CloudFormation console, and I see it's creating. stack name. We can go to the output, and we can click on the pipeline URL output. And now it's running through two actions in parallel, right? It's running through a CFN nag action, and just to really demonstrate that you can run these in parallel. And the way we did, if you look at the CFN nag action, look at the build action, the run order is 1. In parallel. And so here we're going to make a change. Would have server-side encryption enabled. Okay, so what we're going to do is that we're going to go, and so let's type in code commit. And so it was the same name as the CloudFormation stack that we created. So we can go back here, type git clone. So we just got the URL. And so now we can back, right? And in the build spec, we can the local directory, which is the copy, and then I make the changes, right? So and then I'm going to push those changes into code commit. So I can go back to code commit. And I can see that it was just last modified right now, right? So I just made this change. I can look at the build spec, what it sees the build spec file, I can see that's running volume encrypted. So now if I go back to CodePipeline, and it picked up that change. So that generated a pipeline and generated a code build project. In that code build project, we had a build spec file. In that, and it first ran a CloudFormation template that had an EBS volume that was not encrypted. And so we changed it to another volume encrypted. We committed that back to code commit. We saw it go through its pipeline. And then now we saw that into the process. So every time we make a code, we ensure that it goes through the same steps and prevents any CloudFormation from being deployed into production that has any of these security vulnerabilities built into it. So this is a really great way to prevent problems from occurring in the first place. You can see the rest of the steps. You can also see some of the resources that I went through. And if you need to, you can clean up any of the resources that you created in this sub lesson.